This episode is brought to you by Muntons Malts, a company that is passionate about providing premium malts to brewers worldwide. For over a century, Muntons has been a leading supplier of brewing and distilling malts, offering the finest British malted barley on the market. You can experience the difference Muntons offers by joining a recipe receiving tier of our Trub Club, because every kit that ships out now includes premium Muntons malt. You know, we've known the Muntons crew for a long time, and I can tell you, friend, you're going to love brewing with their grains. Ask your local supply shop to carry Muntons malts, or homebrewers can join our Trub Club at homebrewhappyhour.com/club, be a part of the community, and come brew with us. Thank you, Muntons, for supporting our efforts and homebrewers worldwide. Today's show is brought to you by Hopsdirect.com. Grown in the esteemed Yakima Valley on the Pewterball family farm, Hopsdirect.com offers the widest variety of hops available online at incredibly competitive pricing. It's simple. They grow hops, they sell hops, and they ship hops straight from their family-owned farm to your doorstep. Producing the highest quality hops is Hopsdirect.com's passion, and they're proud to be an independent grower in the craft beer industry. Go to Hopsdirect.com right now and get what you need to make your brew day better. That's Hopsdirect.com. Today's show is brought to you by Imperial Yeast. You hear us gushing over Imperial Yeast all the time, and that's because their yeast performs for us in every batch that we brew. Imperial Yeast is adored by commercial breweries and home brewers alike. Their pitch-right pouches are jam-packed with over 200 billion fresh yeast cells, guaranteed to deliver flawless, fast fermentations every time. Imperial Yeast strains are grown by a team of pro brewers and home brewers who live to help other brewers learn more and ferment better. Join any recipe receiving tier of our Trub Club and get a free upgrade to premium Imperial Yeast with every recipe kit that ships out to you. Learn more at homebrewhappyhour.com/club and come brew with us.
Entertaining shows with content that spreads information and sparks discourse throughout the community. This is the Pearl Media Network.
Altbier 101, history, brewing techniques, and recipe recommendations with Horst Dornbusch. This is Homebrew Happy Hour, episode 406. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. This is the show where we supply the answers to your homebrewing questions and discuss all things related to craft beer. And if you, my friend, have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you could email Joshua at homebrewhappyhour.com. That would get you a $15 gift card to catconnection.com, but even better, you can call it into 325-305-6107. And when I use your voicemail question on a future episode, you're going to get yourself a $25 gift card to catconnection.com. I love giving Todd's money away. I'm one of your co-hosts, Joshua Stubing. Usually I'm joined by Todd and James. Todd's out of town. I'm giving James a break. It's actually his birthday the day we're recording this. So instead, I brought back one of my favorite people on the planet. He is a renowned beer judge, beer author, speaker, consultant, and more importantly, literally the author of the Altbier book. It's Mr. Horst Dornbusch. My friend, how are you doing? You brought your copy. We both have our copies. Look at that. I need to get you to sign mine is what I need. I see you in person, and would it be weird for you to sign my copy? Because I really would love that. I would.
Well, we meet. If you have your copy around, I would gladly sign it.
Perfect.
But I'm in Munich. You are in Texas. When you were in Vegas, I'm in Virginia, so whatever.
That's right. And I was just in Denver. Do you ever make it to the Great American Beer Festival? Because you are mostly in the commercial side of the industry. Do you ever make it out there for the Great American Beer Festival?
Oh my God, maybe 10 times. I have frequently judged the GABF competition there, and also on occasion awarded the medal round there, and including a medal round on Altbier. So,
So James and I, Todd did not go this year. He's on an antelope hunt instead. Whatever. But James and I did a video at YouTube, youtube.com/Homebrew Happy Hour about finding the best alt beer at Great American Beer Festival. And the reason, not just because we love it, you might either be surprised or you can explain it. Only 6 breweries, Horst, brought an alt beer for their booth. Out of the 180 whatever breweries that were present, there were only 6 alt beers available to try. Do you think this style will ever gain popularity? Because 6 is not a lot at all.
well, you see, you have to distinguish between quality and quantity. The real connoisseurs, of course, know how to appreciate an alt beer. And I know what I'm talking about. I have not only written this book, which is now ancient because it came out in 1998 when I was much younger and my hair was of a different color. In 2000, I also won a GABF bronze medal for my commercial alt beer in the alt beer category. So, anyway.
Yes, you have the street cred. I don't want to frustrate you, but I have to confess, I have been telling people I'm one of the world's foremost experts on alt beer. It's been getting me some FaceTime on some other YouTube channels. I apologize for the stolen valor, but it has been getting me free alt beer to try as well. So I have been, yeah. But because I actually have been pointing people your direction, specifically your book. We have a affiliate link for the book from Amazon. And I throw that link out all the time because I know you said it's ancient, and we'll get to later in this conversation what you might change about this book if you were to write. Yeah. But to be fair, it's still a solid foundation for anyone today wanting to learn about the style, the intricacies of it, and very, very good, solid recipes that are easy to follow for extract or partial mash or all grain brewing. You covered it all. So I at least think that this is still a good place to start. But before we do that, alt beer. We've had you on the show many times. You're actually a fan favorite, and mostly because you are a walking encyclopedia of not just alt, but beer in general. I appreciate your time. So let's get this started with kind of a history of alt, because like I said, at Great American Beer Festival, there was only 6 commercial breweries. It's not a household beer in the United States, and it may never be, and that's fine. But let's talk about the history of the style and leading up until, maybe modern times of the style. But how did alt beer even come to be? What is alt beer?
Oh my God. Now we would need about a whole day to cover this. So I was once an editor at the Reader's Digest, and the Reader's Digest in those days were famous for condensing things. So I will try to give you a condensed history. As you know, the oldest archaeological record of brewing in Central Europe is an amphora found in Kasendorf near Kulmbach in northern Bavaria. It was found in a Celtic grave and dates from around 800 BC. And the beer in there contains some wheat, oak leaves for flavoring. They didn't know what hops was, and it was slightly dark. So I say we can consider that sort of maybe a precursor to the Altbier. For me, the most interesting early reference to Altbier was written by Tacitus, the Roman scribe, historian, and chronicler who wrote at the end of the 1st century, a current epoch. And he talked about the tribes along the River Rhine, where the Altbier was born and where I was born. I was born about half a mile from the River Rhine in Düsseldorf, home of the Altbier. All a coincidence, of course. And he said these tribes made a sort of a rotten type of wine from rotten barley. and they like to get drunk on it. And he suggested that the Romans should wait until the tribes get drunk so that they can easily subdue them with their swords. And as I said, that reference dates from the end of the 1st century current epoch. That means we can say Altbier is probably one of the oldest beer styles in the world, next to, by the way, Finnish Sahti. So Altbier is probably 2,000 years old, and it has evolved ever since Roman times, of course. And one of the things that I would not change but add in the book is I would add a bigger reference to Keuterbier. Keuterbier is an ale that was the most popular beer style, if we want to call it style, roughly between the 13th or 14th century and the early 19th century in the lowlands of Western Europe. That is Holland, Belgium, France, northern France, the Rhineland, Westphalia, that area. And a Keuterbier was sort of half barley malt, half wheat malt, and it was available in two varieties, one hop flavored and the other not. And I presume the quote not hop flavored one was probably a Groot beer. And it is fair to suggest that the Keuterbier, which is today relatively unknown, and it has sort of died out, except in Münster, they still make an Altbier with about 40% wheat. So I think that one is probably closer related to the Keuterbier than the modern Altbier. But I think Keuterbier was probably the progenitor, if you wish, of several modern beer styles. The Altbier, the Kölsch, the Wies, which was a whitish, cloudy Kölsch that preceded the Kölsch. I would argue that the Bière de Saison, the Bière des Mars, the Belgian wheat beer or Bière Blanche, or the Bière de Mars Alsacienne from Strasbourg, they were all sort of successors, essentially, of the Keuterbier. And the Altbier style evolved essentially in the early 19th century. As you know, in the roughly 14th to 16th century, lager yeast evolved in Bavaria. And we now know that lager yeast is a hybrid between Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the old style ale yeast, and Saccharomyces eubayanus, a yeast that is at home in the high Andes in Patagonia. And those two guys, Cerevisia and eubayanus, by the way, eubayanus was discovered only in 2011.
Oh, wow.
Remind you, this book came out in 1998. So you asked me, what would I change? There are a whole bunch of things that we have learned since this book came out, and I would obviously make reference to them and include them. Now, in the hybridization between the old style ale yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and that vagabond microbe from the Andes occurred in Bavaria in the late 13th, early 14th century. Others argue maybe 15th or 15th century, even early 17th century. We don't know exactly, but we do know from genome sequencing that our lager yeast, Saccharomyces pasteurianus, is indeed a hybrid of that funky microbe from the Andes and the old style ale yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So, and that emerged sometime in the late Renaissance. Now, in the Altbier book, I mentioned that in 1603, the city council of Cologne passed an ordinance forbidding the use of bottom fermenting yeast in the city. Now, remember, at that time, there was no distinction between Altbier and Kölsch.
Right.
All the beers were Kräuter beers.
Yeah.
Right? But they had to be top fermented. So I find it very interesting that we now have evidence of the emergence of an understanding of two types of fermentation, cold and warm, they called them. In German, kalte Gür. Gür is Old German for Gärung, which is the German word for fermentation. So they learned that there was a cold fermentation, a kalte Gür, and the warm fermentation, a warme Gür. And that coincided roughly with the City Council of Cologne forbidding bottom fermentation, which is what happened to take over. Sorry for that.
Oh, you're good.
Area around the same time. So we can argue that it was around that time that the old style, and alt is German for old, the old style of brewing was sort of took roots in the Rhineland and in Westphalia. Now, the earliest reference, incidentally, to Kräuterbier, the predecessor of the Altbier, I happen to have found what I believe is the oldest reference to that beer style. And it was written, and I printed this out, a couple of things here so I could tell you the truth. It was written in a book called, are you ready for this? Philomati Muse Juvenalis. And you can read it. Well, maybe you can't, but I can. You can read it on Google Books, believe it or not. And it was written in 1656. And the author is Fabio Chigi. Fabio Chigi was the papal emissary to Münster in Westphalia in 1648, when they negotiated the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics. Yeah. It lasted 1618 to 1648. He was the papal emissary to that peace treaty. Later on, this guy became Pope Alexander VII. And after Münster, after the peace was concluded, he moved to Paris and wrote a book. And Philomati Muse Juvenalis means the young muses of a friend of learning. So he wrote that in Latin. And I have the passage here. Potunt dant hordea putrida flammis, cocta lupi florem, lupus, hops, lupi florem cotsi miscebis amari. They like to put the hops in there. So I don't know if you want me to read the whole Latin quote, but basically it says he tasted two types of Kräuterbier, as he said. He called it a nectar erit, vulgi de nomine Kräuter vocatur illa, which in the common vernacular they called Kräuti, and the other they called Bira, beer. And he says the Westphalian tribes preferred the Kräuter with the hops, which they drank in copious quantities, and because in those days they were prohibited to drink water. Now this is a fellow who later became a pope in Rome, and he wrote this thing in his book about the muses that inspired him in his youth. and he makes a reference to the Kräuter beer he drank in Münster, Westphalia, which still makes the Münster Altbier. So I think that is kind of interesting.
It's not only, it's incredible, and I'm sorry to cut you off. I wanted to say two things. One, I laughed earlier because I thought you were questioning my literacy. I didn't know it was in Latin. It was perfect either way, Horst, because you were like, I can read it. I don't know if you can. I thought you were questioning my literacy, and I was like, that's great. You fit right in.
I assume that your Latin is not quite up to snuff these days.
I haven't worked on it in a while. No, I haven't. But also, my second follow-up that's sort of related, that was all in the 16 something. What was up with Munster, man? Wasn't it? Well, when was the rebellion? Like 1530 or something? Like Munster was a hub of controversy.
No, we're talking about the city of Münster.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Münster. What year was he in Münster and writing about it? What year did you say that was?
That was the end of the 30 Years' War.
Right. I mean, like wasn't it the 1530s that Münster was the headquarters of the like a Anabaptist revolt, right? And like a peasants' war and.
That I do not know.
Yeah, I listened to a history podcast. Münster, you would think would be insignificant in regards to world history. It just seems like a lot has happened there, was my point. Todd and I went, when we fly into Frankfurt, we go to Krefeld, because that's where CM Becker is. We go to Dusseldorf, obviously. And then because we both listened to this podcast, we went to Münster, and we had a Münster Alt, and it was
Alt.
Yeah, it was not Dusseldorf Alt. It was definitely not.
It's got about 40% wheat in it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. A lot of body. Yeah.
The original Kräuter beer, actually.
Yeah.
So this, and I mean, the Altbier evolved, of course, in the early, around 1830. And it evolved in 4 brew pubs in Düsseldorf. Zum Urier, Schumacher, Schlüssel, and Füchse. And they're all still operating. And there is one other Altbier brewery in Düsseldorf now. It's called Kürten. And by the way, this glass here is the real Altbier glass from the Urier brew pub. And I couldn't get an Altbier today, so I filled it with Pils. But
that's
anyway,
perfect. Oh, that's a beautiful Pils.
Out of a cylindrical glass. Okay, here it is. There you go. That's the real thing.
Is there a name for because Kolsch is a Stange? I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yes. In Düsseldorf, it's the same.
Okay.
Both have cylindrical glasses, and the Kolsch one is slenderer and taller than the Düsseldorf glass, and it holds half as much, and both are called Stange, and Stange is pole, stick, or rod in German. And that the development amongst these 4 brew pubs in the roughly the 1830s to 1850s is what essentially codified the modern Altbier style. And today, these brew pubs still make their Altbier roughly according to the same recipe, but of course with very, very modern ingredients.
So we're almost 200 years separated from it, right? I mean, we're 180 or whatever years separated. Is that with 180 years ago, technology in general, I mean, it couldn't be more different than it is today. Brewing tech, are still there. They're original. What was old world brewing like for the alt beer specifically compared to maybe modern day? I know I've been to these breweries and I've seen the open fermentation and all that, but I assume it's not done the exact same way as they started doing it.
Well, the last time I was at Uri, which is quite a while back now, they still use the cool ship. And of course, they still use decoction mashing. I don't know if they still do that today because the malts available today are so much more modified. You can really skip some of the old laborious, labor-intensive, 12-hour brew day procedures. Also, if you don't use a cool ship, but a heat exchanger that is enclosed, you also minimize the chance of infection and all that good stuff. But in the old days, the one of the key differences, in my view, is of course the way the malt was kilned. The Brits invented pneumatic malting, which means you blow hot air through the malt to dry it. They invented that sort of at the end of the 18th, the early 19th century, and a guy called Patrick Steed patented the first pneumatic malting process in 1849. But, it wasn't used before in Britain, but not in Düsseldorf. Thus, the dark color of the Altbier comes in part from a small amount of slightly scorched kernels that are also slightly smoky because you direct fired the kiln with local wood. That, of course, is no longer done except at Schlenkerlei in Bamberg, and they call it Rauchbier. And there was a time when all beer was Rauchbier, but today it's a special style, right? So we can assume that Düsseldorf Alt was also slightly smoky because of the kilning technique. And of course, it was open fermented. And the other thing that is special about it is obviously the specialty yeast strain that has evolved there in the Rhineland and has adapted. If you're looking at ambient temperature fermentation, it has adapted to the local temperature, which is much milder than, let's say, in the foothills of the Alps in Munich, for instance. And it's also slightly different from the yeast used traditionally in Great Britain, the traditional London-style yeast, which throws more esters and a little bit more diacetyl. But the Düsseldorf yeast can ferment at a lower temperature than the English yeasts and at a higher temperature than the lager yeasts of Bavaria. So and then if you age the beer nicely, you lager it, and it's an ale, but you lager it, then during lagering, the yeast will then start to absorb, to scour the brew for oxygen, which enhances the keeping qualities of the beer. And it will also absorb or reabsorb all its own fermentation byproducts. So the taste of an Altbier as an ale is so much cleaner and crisper than the taste of a classic British pale ale or brown ale. And I would still use the Y yeast 1007. I think that's an excellent yeast, and it's my understanding why yeast got that product from the Uri Rupa. I'm not too sure about that, but it's apparently authentic. So I would still use that and adhere to the temperature recommendation, which I believe is sort of between 55 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And quite frankly, in order to reduce the amount of esters, which you don't want in an Altbier, I would stick with a lower temperature range for about a period of 20 days of fermentation before you crash the temperature and send the beer into a lagering tank.
Yeah. Before we get too deep into recommendations for recipe and all that, let's start at as you are obviously you are my go-to for alt beer questions. I bother you enough. I apologize, but I'd love to hear the experts say on the show, because I have my opinion, Todd has his opinion, James has his opinion. If you were judging, let's say, the 2024 Alt Beer World Championships coming up in Comanche, Texas very soon. Don't hate us for calling it that. What are you, for a modern day person, looking for in the style? You're the BJCP judge. What is it that defines the style for someone to be an award winner in your book?
Well, perhaps people are more familiar with bock beer. And bock beer is malt forward. And in terms of hops, it has very little hop bitterness. And it has a lot of hop aromatics. So you want to get the German style noble hop aromatics into the finish, but the upfront bitterness is next to not existing. And you get that maltiness from the use of very good Pilsner malt, some Munich malt, maybe Karamünch, maybe some Vienna malt. In other words, the not too dark caramel malts, but the ones that some of them still have some enzymatic strength. In other words, they are not yet caramelized to the point that they're enzymatically dead. Now, an Altbier is, of course, not a bock beer. However, if we start with the bock beer concept, which everybody knows, and then we throw quite a few more IBUs into that brew, let's say we go up to 35 IBUs, and we use the traditional hops in an Altbier. Classic hops would be Spalter or Spalter Select. The alpha acid rating is relatively low, so you have to throw in a lot of Spalter into the brew, which means you are also automatically getting a ton of aromatics. And if you use some kettle addition and then late additions and maybe some whirlpool additions of that hops, you manage to get both the bitterness and the aromatics, while at the same time, if you composed your grain bill correctly, you're getting the maltiness. And then on top of that, you have the clean fermentation of the specialty yeast, which gives you almost as clean a yeast profile as a lager yeast in a Bavarian bock beer. So, forgive me. So that, I think, might be one of the ways to describe what you're looking for. You want bittersweet maltiness, but not cloyingly sweet, but not a cloyingly sweet finish. It has to be easy drinking, and the finish is almost dry.
I love that explanation, and that I love you're setting it up with what people do understand, because we've all 99% of people watching this show have had Bock, especially our Texas listeners. Shiner Bock is our history down here for craft beer, like gateway craft beer. So that's brilliant, because you're right. It is very, I've almost always said, like trying to compare it to just an amber ale with people, but Bock is much more precise because of that crispiness that you get from a Bock that should be a shared characteristic of an alt beer, in my opinion.
Right. So if you start with a bock beer, and you can call it a modified bock beer, a lager, an ale-ified bock beer, and you keep a bock beer, you go up to 6%, but with the alt beer, you probably want to be closer to 5%, plus minus a few tenths of a point there. So it's, everybody knows the bock beer, but then if you modify it in the direction in which I suggest, then you can get sort of a sensory concept. And the color you want to shoot for is, the bock beer is, especially the Maibock, is sort of amber and pale amber maybe. This one, the alt beer, should probably be more chestnutty. The sheen ought to be that of a shiny chestnut, okay? Or there, you want to approach that. So it's like a pale chestnut. If you look at coffee, you can get the French roast, which is black, or you can get very pale coffee that is gently toasted. You want to be sort of in the middle, okay? You don't... And you talk about what would I change in the recipe for, remember in 1998, the book came out, but I started writing it before.
Sure.
And in those days, you couldn't get any German malts imported from Germany.
Really?
Yeah.
Just because of,
before Best Malts, Weyermann, and all those guys, before they came into the market. But nowadays, Weyermann alone makes 85 different malts. So now we have a sort of a cornucopia of richness to select from. So in the book, in order to get the color and some of the mild roastiness, I use a little bit of the English crystal malt, maybe 60 Lovibonds, but be careful with it, not too much. Today, I would not use crystal malt because that was my improvisation at the time to get some of the Altbier characteristics, the color characteristics at least, and also some of the flavor depth into that brew because you couldn't get German malt. Nowadays, I would stick with a good Pils malt as a base malt. Then for the caramel richness, if you wish, I would go for a Vienna malt, a Munich malt, maybe a Cara aroma, a touch of Cara aroma would work. And then you want to get some Cara Munich maybe. Then maybe a little bit of Cara Pils to give you that nice creamy head that makes the brew smoother. So this is the direction in which I would go, rather than imitating, if you wish, an English brown malt and a brown ale and hope it comes out like an Altbier.
Well, when I had to ask too, because of the maltified malts that we're all using, you would say a decoction is completely unnecessary, or would you still do it in a small batch because it's not that laborious for people doing 5 or 10 gallon or even
right.
50.
Home, that's a different story. But commercially, remember, a conventional shift is 8 hours. When you do decoction, you have to pay overtime.
That's true. Simple. Yeah. Todd doesn't pay us anything if it makes you feel better. When
it consumes a lot more energy, right?
Yes.
So it's energy intensive, labor intensive, thus also capital intensive. And you have to have a decoction cooker. Many brewers don't have that cooker anymore. So, and it is really, in my view, some people say, yeah, but you get a little bit more maltiness if you decoct. That's what they say. I have actually run real tests where I did 2 brews in a 2.5 hectoliter system, 2 absolutely, totally identical brews. One decocted and the other just infusion matched. And then I assembled a group of about 10 professionals, most of them beer sommeliers, trained by the Dermans Academy, and they had to do blind tastings. And as often as not, the people I identified the decocted version correctly and incorrectly. That was, in other words, random choice.
Exactly. Coin flip. Yeah.
From that, I concluded, and I made mistakes. I wasn't quite sure. I concluded that with good malts, decoction is no longer necessary because you can't really taste the difference in the finished product. So if experts can't taste it, I bet you the ordinary consumer won't taste the difference either.
Which is reassuring to lazy people like me, Horst, because that is more work. I mean, a home brewer, it is considerably easier get some of the grains off the top, go roast them, put them back and whatever. But it still adds a lot of more work, more vessels to clean. It's not an enjoyable thing. But I say this a bunch on the show, and I'll reiterate it now for the folks at home. We are living in the absolute best time ever in the history of mankind as homebrewers. It is just with the technology available to us, with the information at our fingertips. We all walk around with supercomputers in our pockets. Exactly. It's incredible, which leads me to a segue about modern brewing. I have jumped on the bandwagon that a lot of homebrewers have with fermentation under pressure. I don't like to, I don't have the ability of temperature control in the summertime, and brewing is already miserably hot in my garage here in Texas in like July, August, September, hopefully.
Oh yeah, sure.
So pressure fermentation has allowed me with ales, especially, to, pitch and ferment under pressure about 10 PSI for, a normal fermentation period at like 74 degrees and have still phenomenal beer. My dad and I just did a Schwartz beer. Believe it or not, we pitched at like 75 degrees. I fermented at 70 under pressure, and it is phenomenal. It's great. It's lagering right now because we're going to save it for Christmas. But
what is for yeast? The Weinstefan 3470.
So no, we use liquid yeast from Imperial, which a lot of theirs are all strains from Y yeast. I believe their owner, that's where he came from, was Y yeast, and so. But either way, not implying Owen stole anything, guys. I promise. Just saying, I think that's what he was familiar with was where they got their strains from, and we used Harvest is their. It's their kind of universal lager yeast is what we use. I'll send you the details on it, but the parameters of it it's like 70% flocculent, and its temperature range is like 50 to 62, maybe. I could be making that part up, but I'll send you the details. I was worried. I've never done a lager under pressure at room temp, and it turned out phenomenal. It was great, very clean. No diacetyl stuck around. I didn't have to then do a diacetyl rest because I was at 70 the whole time anyway, But I guess what I'm getting at is, do you feel like modern day, commercial brewing to some extent is under pressure, right? The bigger the things are, they are technically under pressure because of how fermentation works and that size volume. But are you a believer in doing things the traditional way? Like, don't do an alt beer if you can't control the temperature, or because then it won't actually be an alt beer. If that makes sense, what I'm trying to say.
Okay, now for full disclosure, I've never done primary fermentation under pressure, including when I had a brewery and made batches of 1,000 gallons of Altbier at a time. But I have done secondary fermentation using a closed tank, and you set your Diphenox valve or your Spundapparat in German, your overpressure valve, appropriately so that you release that, so that you don't create excessive pressure, which the yeast really doesn't like.
Right.
I do know that pressure slows fermentation down, and the slower the fermentation, the fewer byproducts you get. Okay, the acetaldehyde, diacetyl, several other esters, fusel alcohols, all of that is suppressed to a certain extent if you ferment under pressure. But I've never fermented, I've never done primary fermentation under pressure. So this is something I do not, I have no knowledge, okay?
Oh,
I only understand the theory, okay?
Yeah.
In practice, I've never done it, so I shouldn't pretend that I know something that I don't.
That's the whole premise of my show. Pretending come on, Horst, you're killing me here.
You screwed it up now?
No.
Oh, yeah. I have done this all my life, and you should see the carboys that I have exploded in my...
Hey, I will say that I told Todd and James I was going to bring it up with you. You know, we host an Altbier competition. It's actually the day I'm publishing this episode is the day of judging for round one. We call it the Altpokal, the Altbier World Championship. People can watch it at youtube.com/Homebrew Happy Hour. Next year, some year in the future, I'm going to spend the Homebrew Happy Hour budget flying you down to Texas for you to be the judge, because I feel like a fraud when I'm judging alt beer. I know I've been to Dusseldorf enough, and I've had the real deal enough and studied. You know, we've had your book for a while. I think we had your book before we ever met you in person. And I think we met you in person in like 2017 or 2018. It's been a while.
Because of the book, if I recall, you searched for me because of the book. And then
that's right.
You just put me through nefarious methods, and I don't even want to know.
I'm charming. My mom says I'm charming, and I have a good personality.
I
know, and here you are. But I am, I guess, bringing it back to the conversation on alt and stuff. I am always intrigued at because the style has evolved since. Before its predecessors and all that, with things like technology or climate change or war or whatever. Do you see this style evolving even differently or going away or exploding in popularity? And that last part I asked because in the United States, Kolsch has had an explosion of popularity in the last 5 years on a commercial level. We could not make a video at Great American Beer Festival about Kolsch because there was 100 of them, and I'm not going to get that drunk for views. I mean, I might, but I didn't. But alt beer, that, like I said, there was only 6. It is not commercially a popular style. Where do you see it? Do you think it'll just be this old world thing from Dusseldorf and not ever have global popularity, or what do you think? All that stuff I asked you, what is an answer?
Well, perhaps we can think of the popularity of Altbier in terms of an analogy. There is the pale ale in England, and there is the English brown ale. The brown ale has never acquired the same popularity as the pale ale. Now, in Munich, in the old days, all beers were dunkel. Then came the helles, the pale lager, basically. And of course, we still make Schwarzbier. But the Schwarzbier has never become as popular as the helles. So if you look at these analogies, so here's a little funny question. Which year did the first Kölsch label appear? Which year?
Okay, 1830.
1918.
No way. Oh, okay.
When did the Altbier get codified for the sort of first time, the modern Altbier?
Yeah, well, that was 18 something.
1805 thereabouts.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think really was the first one out of the gate. Okay. But I'm not entirely sure, but I think I can look it up, but at the off the top of my head, we look at roughly 1835. Okay. Now, the Kölsch is, in a sense, the outgrowth of the Altbier, even though the people in Cologne would hate me for saying that. It required pneumatic malting, the ability to make pale malt. Okay? The pale ale required the ability to make pale malt on a large scale, not just having it dried in the sun, right? You could do that, air-dried pale malt. That existed. It has existed forever. But on a large scale, you needed pneumatic malting. So you can say the Kölsch is the pale development of the Altbier. And remember, the Kölsch uses a specialty ale yeast as well.
Yeah.
It's not English ale yeast. And some yeast labs offer yeast strains and say they're good for both Alt and Kölsch, right? So you can see the family resemblance. And remember the old Kräuterbier, all of them sort of, they hail sort of, they're the descendants of the Kräuterbier, all of them, right? So the Düsseldorf guys never developed their pale Alt, but the Kölsch guys did, okay? Almost a century after the Altbier got codified. So because the Altbier is not pale, it's not like a Helles, it's more like a Dunkel or like a brown ale. So its popularity should be, if we use the analogy, it should be a little bit less popular than the Kölsch.
That makes total sense. Yeah, that perspective, yeah, that makes total sense. I always assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that in America, the reason why, like, I'm not saying even brewers at a commercial level made a choice, or Alt or Kölsch. Kölsch, to me, is a much more straightforward brew day in regards to the grain bill than Alt. Alt has a little more going on. It saves you money, right?
Yeah, you're not looking for the caramel sweetness. You don't have any of those problems.
Yeah, save some on the wallet, and hop usage too. The Alt uses a lot more hop. I mean, at the end of the day, especially you would also know this better than me because your nose is definitely in the midst of the brewing industry. They're trying to save money where they can right now in 2024. It's not the prettiest of scenes for craft beer in the United States right now. And so I am
subject. We can talk about that if you wish someday.
I would love it.
What happened. What are the factors that have changed the fortunes of the craft brew movement / industry in a quarter century after the turn of the millennium? That's a totally different subject.
I'm going to hold you to it. Either we'll do that in December or January, like either a year-end show or a New Year's show, because I think that's the kind of topic that would be good.
December, but early January, I won't be around for 2 weeks.
Yeah, we'll work with your schedule. You are such a busy guy, for real. I'm a busy guy by pretend, but you are definitely. And I know November is swamped for you. You'll be in Germany at the Brew.
I'll come back from Munich December 10, I believe.
We'll make it work. After the show, I'll throw some dates at you, and we'll put it on the calendar like we did this one. Todd has... Yeah.
December and Christmas would be a good time for me. After that, I'll be gone again. And then we are moving into the end of January, probably early February. I might have to go to Germany again. Then mid-March, I have a couple of big projects coming down that just consume me like a vortex. So between mid-December and Christmas would be a good time for me. I will book you. When we're done recording, I will send a link and I will book you, my friend. Because that is a great topic. But here's a thought, a totally funky thought. We talk about the analogies. Yeah. Okay, so you've got your pale ale. Now we have your British India pale ale. Then we get our American India pale ale. Yeah. And we move into those really extreme pale ales, IPAs. Yeah. How about a brewer comes up with the India Kölsch? How about the American India Kölsch? How about the extreme double India Kölsch? How dare you? That's my kind of idea. And as in, Todd would say no and make me stop the show. That's my. Yeah, that's terrible. I do wonder if it is very in right now for like nostalgia and people preserving ways of the past. Do you even see, like I said, like the Altbier, can it evolve or is it so? Are we so engulfed with preserving tradition that it'll probably stick in its current iteration for the foreseeable future, past many of our lifetimes, because of the sake of we have the info, we have the technology to keep it that way. We don't need to change anything. Well, in Düsseldorf, Altbier is considered part of the city's identity and culture. When I grew up there, I was born in 47, as you know. In the 50s, when I was 14 years old, you can drink early there. To me, you order a beer, and what you got was an Altbier. If you wanted a Pils or something else, you had to ask for it. And chances are the bar didn't have it. Certainly not on tap. So beer was Altbier for me. It's deeply rooted in the culture of Düsseldorf, just as the Kölsch is deeply, deeply rooted in the culture of Cologne. Certainly in Franconia, there's some beer styles, the Franconian Landbier. It's really part of the fabric of society. It's, we have the craft brew revolution. You don't need a revolution in Germany. It's been there forever. Just like the French culture is a wine drinking culture. All right. So, and what is happening right now, to the extent that, let's say, heirloom beer styles are being revived, there is a certain nostalgia for not the ever newer thing, like, hey, brewer, what you got new this week?
Right.
It has been around forever, so it's nothing. There's nothing new about it, but the reverence for the tradition is something. The reverence for substance that has stood the test of time. I believe that is coming back. Maybe people want to be less fast-paced because speed itself is meaningless unless you have a solid place to go to, right? It's not just the journey, it's also the destination, my friend. And so I think in Düsseldorf, it seems that Altbier is kind of coming back. There was a time when my contemporaries over there, and I'm a dual citizen, so I'm a schizophrenic guy. I'm a national hermaphrodite or whatever.
Hey.
When I'm over there, I can be a German, and I sound like a German. And over here, I feel more American. And culturally, I've been here for more than 50 years, half a century, so I'm totally accustomed to our ways. But anyway. The beer, there was a time in the 90s where my contemporaries over there tried to be kind of modern, and they stopped drinking Altbier and they ordered Pils, Helles. And I think that trend is now reversed. Altbier is coming back, and it's really a matter of emotional and cultural identity. Okay? And I think, by the way, once we talk about craft beer, right now in the next generation of beer drinkers here, we don't have that cultural identity with craft beer.
No, not in this country. Yeah.
They don't have that. So we can talk about that some other time, but those are interesting. The link between culture and alcoholic beverages is a very interesting topic. It seems that beer needs a home. You talk to a guy from Texas. If that guy is a real Texan, he's from Texas, man.
Oh yeah.
And he wants you to know that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah.
And a guy from Chicago is very different from a guy from Alabama.
Right.
And I don't judge. I don't evaluate.
I do.
But I see the difference. Okay? So, and there are certain symbols, if you wish, that, nobody in Düsseldorf would wear lederhosen and a dirndl. But everybody in Munich seems to own the old costumes when they go to the Oktoberfest. And they wear them in the street. And they look ridiculous. Okay? But nobody in Hamburg would think of wearing lederhosen. So that is, and if you own that stuff and you don it to go to the Oktoberfest, that's part of your identity. Rightly or wrongly, as I said, I don't judge. It's just descriptive, right? I mean, a Boston Brahmin is a cultural entity that is definable and recognizable. I lived in New England for 40 years. I understand the New England type. I even understand the difference between the Vermont type and the Bostonian. So culture is something that is psychologically comforting. And I think beer is part of the sensory component of that cultural identity. I really think so.
I completely agree. And that's actually, for me, man, that was such a beautiful wrap up of this conversation. I think we covered everything I wanted to about all, like you had told me before we recorded, this could have been a whole book. So to do what you did with like an hour and some change, I sincerely admire your ability to do that, because I have a hard time getting out of small talk of this show under 20 minutes. And you covered a very good surface level and a little bit below in an hour. So I really
tried to bore you, but we're geekish, but then
I do appreciate it. And real quick, I'm going to tell the audience at home, if you want more alt beer content and you're watching this the time we're recording it, go to youtube.com/homebrew happy hour and you can watch. I don't think it's going to be live streamed because Todd's internet's not good, but it'll be published. It'll be published either October 24th, sometime through the 26th, which is this week that you're watching this show right now at youtube.com/homebrew happy hour. Again, it is the Alt Pokal 2024. My favorite time of the year, Mr. Dornbusch, because people across the country send us their alt beer for us to judge. And in the future, like I said, I'm going to spend the budget and get you down here to be a judge and to come to the ranch and to shoot guns and to eat barbecue and be a real Texan. We'll train you up.
Coordinate the timing.
Yes. Oh yeah. We will.
Coordinate the timing.
We will. And I know October is when we usually do the competition, and your Octobers are usually swamped. So we will coordinate as soon as possible for next year's to get you down here. So, anyways, I sincerely appreciate you, and please say hi to Todd and James for me at the Brow when you see them. I'm not coming.
Oh, okay.
So, I appreciate it, my friend. And that will do it for this episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you could go to homebrewhappyhour.com. You could email joshua@homebrewhappyhour.com. Even better, leave us a voicemail at 325-305-6107 and get yourself a $25 gift card to keckconnection.com. Thank you to our show sponsors like Muntons Malt, premium grains for a better brew day. If you aren't already brewing with Muntons, you can give them a try by joining our Trub Club at a recipe receiving level. For the best hops available online, give our friends at hopsdirect.com a visit and pick up what you need for your next brew day. Also, get a pack of premium imperial yeast along with delicious recipes from us when you join the Trub Club. Again, go to patreon.com/homebrew happy hour and come brew with us. On behalf of the absent Todd Burns, the absent James Carlson, and the Pearl Media Network, I'm Joshua Stubing. Thanks for listening.